Welcome to the Serenity Podcast. This is Paul Bauer, and our guest today is Melissa Oatman. She's from Collinsville, Illinois, and she's a healer, channeler, spiritual teacher, and intuitive. She hosts Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness, which I love that title, a weekly podcast dedicated to improving people's lives and deepening their spirituality. She's the author of two books, Beautifully Broken, I love that title, A Spiritual Woman's Guide to Thriving After a Divorce or Breakup. And this one really catches my attention for a lot of different reasons, and we may go into that. It's called Beautiful Mourning, and the spelling on that is Mourning. It's a guide to life after loss. She's a single mother of twins and passionate about helping others heal and helping them find the life they truly love. So a warm welcome to you, Melissa. Wonderful to
Thank
have
you
you.
so much. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So that title, let's talk about that title. So why did you write that book, and how do you see it as beautiful? Because this is an event in people's lives that they'll avoid at all costs for the grief that it causes.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Beautiful Mourning. I wrote the book after losing my mom to pancreatic cancer 2 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I actually had a lot of loss very close together. Started in September of 2019. The woman who was my great aunt, but she, for all intents and purposes, was my grandma because we grew up living next door to each other. And my mom was a single mom and she worked a lot. So we would spend all of our time either with my great aunt or with my mom's mom, my grandma. And in 2019, my great aunt passed away. She ended up like falling downstairs and hitting her head, and it was a very tragic thing. And then in 2020, it was February 2020, my kid's senior year, my ex-husband committed suicide. And I was in the middle of class teaching when my daughter was sitting a few feet from me because I had her in class. I was teaching German, and I received a text from my ex-brother-in-law, and I knew that was not good because I never ever talked to him or received texts from him. So I excused myself to go out in the hall and call him. And he said, I wanted to let you know that my brother took his life last night. And my kids hadn't really been speaking to him. There was a rift there for very good reason. But it was right before it was their senior year. It was right before 2 weeks after their birthday. And then COVID hit a few weeks later, and we went on lockdown. And they didn't have a normal graduation, but our school district did a fantastic job of making it special for them. They had like a red carpet where they would come up one at a time to get their degrees. They didn't have prom. Prom was canceled that year.
Mm.
So that kind of started it. And then in June of that year, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at the beginning, they told us, well, we think she can beat it because it's in the, I guess, tail or not the head or wherever it's not as bad.
Yeah.
And they said we can do a modified Whipple and we'll do all of this. And it seemed very hopeful. And in my own opinion, I think if this had happened at any other time other than COVID, she probably would have survived it. But COVID delayed a lot of things for her. And she also just wasn't gaining weight. She kept losing a lot of weight, not eating, and so we really had a rough time with her because she was very, very sick. She struggled a lot with this with chemo. Chemo was horrible to her. She really had a rough time with that. Then a year a year before my mom died, her mom died. So we had a lot of deaths in like rapid succession, it
Yeah.
felt like. So after her death, because her death was really hard, we had to make the decision to turn off life support and do all of that, which is never easy. And I watched my brother, like all of our family members reacted differently to it. But once my mom passed away, it was like she was the glue that held everyone together.
Yes.
So I watched his family kind of fell apart, drifted away. Even I was very close to my brother. We were like best friends, and I haven't seen him now in a few weeks because we just don't talk. He tried to do everything in his power to avoid processing that grief, and he
Yeah.
ran from it and turned to all kinds of bad things as a lot of people do. Like there, you can either process your grief in a healthy way or you can self-destruct.
Yeah,
And and there's of course in between too, right? You can be somewhere in between that. But that was my purpose for writing the book, was because it was a way for me to heal. I was kind of processing the grief that I had by writing about it, but also I wanted to help others because I saw what my brother went through, and I just thought, wow, if he just had a book or a tool, or I know there are other books out there, but
yeah,
if he just had something that could show him like, hey, you have to process this. You have to get through this. You can't run from it, or you're just gonna make yourself sick. A lot of bad things happen when you don't process your grief, and there is a way to move to the other side of that. And the beautiful part of the mourning is I learned to look at it from a completely different perspective. Instead of, at first, of course, it was like, why did my mom have to die? This isn't fair. Why do I only get this much time with her when other people, their parents live to be 100, and that isn't fair? And what I realized was, what you have to look at things from a different perspective.
yes,
If you shift it to, well, I had 42 years, or, I guess 44 at that time. I had 44 years with her that were amazing, and we were very close. So a lot of people might have a parent they're not even that close to, and they get all that time with them, but they don't appreciate it.
yes,
Or if I looked at it, she's actually moved on, and everyone has different beliefs, but I believe that when you pass on, your soul moves on to a different level, that people might call heaven, whatever you want to call it, it's fine with you. And I believe that we should have been celebrating for her, because even if God came down tomorrow and said you can have your mom back, I wouldn't bring her back here. This earth school, because we came here to learn, is really heavy, and it's no
yeah,
one really wants to be here, but we're all here and trying to survive.
yeah,
um, but I wouldn't bring her back here because she's in a much better place. She earned her reward because she did what she came here to do, and now it's time for her to have that. And so we grieve, it's really a selfish thing. We grieve for ourselves because we're missing that person,
yeah.
and it's hard to see past our own grief sometimes. That saying, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Hmm.
Sometimes you cannot even see that because you're just so much in grief. But if we really stopped and thought about it, grief teaches us a lot of lessons, and it also is for us. It's not for the other person. The other people who move on are not sad. They're not sad at all.
Yeah,
And they're honestly, I believe, still all around us, just in a different, form. They're now
yes,
souls instead of in the human body.
yeah. Well said. That I admire you for your. I take a deep breath here, Melissa, because words alone cannot describe these essence connections or epiphanies or when these life-changing moments happen. um Believe it or not, they have some grace connected to them, and it's hard, really, really hard to find that grace, or at least a way to reckon with it. So that brings up the next question. Did you Were you always able to process grief like this, or did you have some tumultuous moments where it hit you so hard that you didn't know how to get up? And then was it a progression? Tell us, like, how did you understand? Like, how did you get savvy with grief and the ability to process it?
No, it's something that honestly you have to work through. It's not something where, the moment she died, I was like, oh, this, it'll be okay. I didn't feel that at all.
Yeah,
The moment like, I watched her take her last breath. And at that first moment of taking her last breath, I was relieved a little bit because it was like, oh, she's finally free.
yeah,
But the moments that go like right after that is like, oh, wow, this sucks. Now what? Now we have to do. And what I talk about in my book is right after someone first dies, I think you're so much in shock and there's so much to do. I mean, it's immediate. Immediately after, they're coming up to me saying, you need to sign this paperwork and have the funeral home and have the body released. I had to call the funeral. There were so many things to do. And that first week,
yeah,
when I took off of work, it was just constantly, I put together a video for the memorial service. I had to write the obituary, we had to get clothes for her, we had to do all of these things. And even though you're sad and whatever, I always say those first few days, I was in shock. And I feel like I was walking through a dream. Like I know that I was awake,
Yeah.
but it didn't feel like it. And it's one of those things where I knew I ate, I know that I talked to people, I know I did things.
Yeah.
I can't remember any of that now.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because it's such a blur. And I think the true grief often doesn't hit people until after everything is over.
Yeah.
Because at first, you're comforting everyone else. You're at the wake, and people are coming up to you just crying and sobbing, and you're trying to comfort them, even though that seems so like this is backwards. You should be comforting me. But she was
Yeah.
a teacher. And so
Yeah.
there were her former students coming up and just bawling, and we're trying to comfort them that we really didn't have time to focus on ourselves. And
Yes.
it was after the dust settled, when people stopped calling you and asking you, are you okay? Or do you need anything? It's in those moments of solitude that it hits you. And it hits in waves. Some days you feel angry. You know, the very first emotion for me was anger. I was pissed off at the entire world
Yeah.
because I thought they mishandled her case. This shouldn't have happened. And just over and over again, all of those what ifs. Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we
Right.
do that?
Right.
Then
Were
there
you mad,
comes guilt.
were you
Yeah.
mad at God at all for taking your mom?
You know, I wasn't, but I think it's perfectly normal and acceptable to be mad at God.
Yeah.
And there's some sort of unspoken rule, like you're not supposed to be mad at God. Like
Yeah.
that's blasphemous.
Yeah.
And I think it's like any other parent. Did you ever get mad at your parents and, say, I remember telling my mom I hated her when I was a teenager, and now, of course, we've laughed about it. Like, you were terrible. Well, as a teenager, that's what you are. But I think a loving God understands that you're going to feel this. And I think it's
Yes.
okay. And I think it's all right to tell God you're mad and to
Yes.
say that and to process it because I do talk about that in my book and I say it's okay to tell God you're mad
Yes.
because I think if we have an all-knowing, all-loving, all-encompassing God or higher power, whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it,
Yeah.
I think that it's understood. Like, yeah, I get it. You're good. You're mad.
No question. Yeah.
Right.
The reason I ask is because it might be, being proxy for all the listeners, or at least those of the listeners that have either had to deal with it, or someday, sooner or later, they're going to have to deal with it. The first passing in my family, and you and I talked about this offline, was my brother. Totally unexpected. We thought my dad was going to go because he had advanced Alzheimer's. So we were prepping for my dad, and there's my brother. He just all of a sudden just passes away. And I remember coming home like the first night, and I'm looking up to the ceiling in my home, and I'm about to say, how dare you take my bro, my big bro? And I
Mhm.
was mad, that anger you just talked about, right? And then the next passing was my dad about 2 or 3 years later. And I had a similar form of anger looking up to the same ceiling saying, what? This isn't fair. Like that's a deep feeling. Like that's, like in the subconscious, those little statements that we say about life isn't fair. Now, fast forward the tape, similar to your experience, um, without going deep into my story, because this is about you, it's like, yeah, now I see it differently. And I've walked through those steps that you walk through. So let's talk about the steps. Um, and let's ask this question, Melissa. What's the difference between grief and mourning? How would a person know that they're in what stage, for example? Like, and not to make it formulaic, because it certainly isn't, right?
Right. Yeah. So for the purpose of helping people understand what grief is, I went back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she said that there were 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Those were later reimagined to now there being 7 stages of grief. And so I talk about each stage in my book. And the first one, I think, the first one was shock and anger. I think there's shock and anger.
Yeah.
You'll have to forgive me. I don't know them in order, but they don't actually go in order anyway. And that's the thing. And I talk about this in my book. I state what the stages are, but understand they're not linear. Some people skip stages altogether. You move back and forth through them several times.
Yes.
You're going to feel all the different emotions 500 million times, and they'll come back to you. And you might even feel really good for a while, and all of a sudden something triggers you, and you go right back to that place. And that's okay too. It's
Yeah.
grief is there's no timeline. It doesn't expire. And in my personal opinion, I think you grieve forever for the person that you lost. It's just that the way that you grieve changes. I think you'll always have that grief, but it changes as you know. It doesn't. It's easier. I say easier. It's never easy, but what I mean is,
Yeah.
you don't feel so trapped in that process once you time moves along a little bit and you're able to process it.
Agreed.
But I talk about that. I think anger, shock, and guilt are some of the heaviest things you'll go through. And I think they're the first stages a lot of people go through because number one, if it was a sudden passing that you were not expecting, then you have the shock.
Right.
And then shock and denial and anger, those things all come up right away because it's we knew my mom could pass away because she had pancreatic cancer, yet it was still shocking the way it happened. And we were very upset about it, angry, all of those things, and felt a lot of guilt because in our case, we thought we should have done more to help her so that she might have gotten through this. And for some people, they feel guilt. Like, for example, I talk about this in my book. We went to a grief group, my sister and I, and there was a woman there who her grandson was doing drugs and she was very angry at him and she hung up on him the day before he died.
Oh
So
boy.
she had this guilt that why did I say those things to him? Why did I talk to him like that?
Yeah.
And it's hard because you're left with that. But as I explain in my book, just because someone has passed on doesn't mean you can't ask for forgiveness or work through forgiveness for that person and for
Good.
yourself.
Very good.
That's always possible, you know? And one of the things that I thought was really cool was she said, you should write a letter to yourself from your grandson's perspective. What would he say to you? Do you think that someone who's died and is on the other side is going to say, why did you talk to me like that? That was so. I was like, no. As souls, when we go on to the other side, we're able to see the big picture. We're able to see everything and we understand everything. And I think that when souls are on the other side, if they said, you have 2 minutes to spend with your loved one, they're not going to come down and go, I hate you. Why would you have said that to me? Or why didn't you take care of me? No, they're going to tell you how much they love you and are proud of you and all of those things. So we're the ones that hold on to that. And I say that suffering is a human condition. There's no suffering on the other side. We're the ones who suffer, and a lot of times we cause our own suffering because we focus on, and that's part of the grief process too, is you have to shift what you're focusing on. And a lot of times, if you felt guilty about something, if you wrote it down, like what you're feeling guilty about, you'll note that most of the time it's very irrational. Like, oh, I forgot to say I love you the last time I saw them. You really think they're holding on to that? No. So it's important to forgive yourself and let go for all of
That's
those
it.
things.
Yeah, that's it. That's huge. Yeah, I'm really feeling as you're sharing, I can tell that in order for you to share, you got to connect to what you've experienced, right? So
Yeah.
as we listen to you, Melissa, we're having our own feelings. We're going into our file cabinets and our memories and and the word karma comes to me as you're speaking. And without any like super spiritual definition, karma is just like it's energy uh between two people or my own personal karma. And if you have good karma, it's much easier. It feels lighter, when the karma is heavy or unresolved, like for example, when someone passes away and the grieving lasts longer than you would want it to, for example, or if you're feeling those feelings you talked about, guilt or anger or resentment, and you're mad at God still, that's karma. And it really isn't that other person's issue. You're really good at this. I really like how you help us clarify that. When that person has passed, they're free. Like what I said to my mom after my brother passed away, because you can imagine how hard it hit her to hear
Yeah.
that her oldest son, her baby boy, passed away. And I said, he's free, Mom. He's free.
Yeah.
I remember how good that made me feel. And I truly felt it. So my brother and I had good karma. That's why it was easy for me to say that.
Yeah.
My dad and I had pretty good karma. I was watching a movie last night with Robert Duvall and Robert Downey Jr. called The Judge, and it was about the tough karma they had. But the cool part of that story is they got to resolve some of it before Duvall passed away. It was
Mm.
beautiful. And movies like this, if a person were to ask you, Melissa, can you give me a list of things I can do to help process some of this grief? Great music, some great movies, some great books like yours allow this journey to be a little bit easier, along with a coach, along with a therapist of some kind who has walked that route before, not someone who's doing transactional psychology, no disrespect. That's not
Yeah.
going to get to your feelings.
No.
You want to feel, allow yourself. And by the way, so let's get back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for a moment. There is a breakthrough that happens. You've got those feelings, anger, resentment, guilt, etc. Share with us, when does it get easier? Like not on just her map, but yours. When is it okay for me to say, maybe life's going to be okay? What's that next step?
I think that comes when you start to shift your perspective and instead of looking at what you lost, looking at what you had and realizing that your loved one would not want you to stay stuck there. Your loved one would not want you to stay in your house and say, I'm going to grieve forever and cry and I can't enjoy my life again because they're not here with me.
Yeah.
And I know that you want to. A lot of times that's what you want to say is that we can't do that because so and so can't be here with us to do it with us. And we decided, the first summer after my mom passed, we always used to take a trip and my whole family. We decided to continue that, to do that. So we planned to take our first cruise and we made her a part of it because we had my mom cremated. So we took a little bit of her ashes and we spread them
Nice.
at in Long Beach because she loved that area. And
Nice.
then the next summer we went to Europe and Greece was a bucket list item for her that she never got to do. So we took more of her ashes and spread them in Greece. And we made it like a ceremony. And I think if you can get to the place where you realize that you never really lost anything, it's not lost. Yes, you're grieving because you can't hug them, you can't hear their voice necessarily, or you can't,
Yes.
you feel like you can't get advice from them, but they are always trying to show us that they're still with us. And I
Yes.
don't know what you believe in, but my mom uses music. She was a singer. She used to sing Patsy Cline all the time.
Oh, cool.
And my daughter is 22 years old. She does not listen to country at all. She thinks country music is horrible. But my mom loved old country. So she's listening to Spotify on the way home, and Crazy comes on. And if you know anything about Spotify, it plays the same type of music that you would listen to.
Yes.
Crazy would not be on my daughter's playlist at all. And it
Yeah.
came on in the car, and she called me and said, Mom, that had to be Nana. And I said it was. And she's done that to us many times before, where
Yeah.
Crazy actually became a really popular song on TikTok for people to put like background music to right after she died. And I said, what are the odds that a song from 1950 something would suddenly now be a popular TikTok song? But she knew her grandchildren and even like my sister and I are always on TikTok. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what a better way, what better way to get our attention and say, hey, I'm still here. Hey, I'm fine,
Yeah.
than to do that. So I think if you start to realize that you can still very much communicate with your loved ones, just in different ways,
Yeah.
I'm around the house sometimes and something happens. I'm like, okay, mom, I hear you. I see you. I know you're still there. They can send you signs. You can ask for signs. But I think once you really understand that the love that you had with that person can never truly be lost, that can never be lost. You
Agreed.
cannot, no one can take that from you. And if you realize that you will be reunited with them one day, that helps to ease some of that pain and that guilt. So
Yeah, there's a woman that was in my mom's guild. This was just days after my mom passed away. This is back in 2011. Her first name is Midge, that was in my mom's guild. And she asked for permission. Paul, can I sing this at your mom's what you call the little get together afterwards, the little
celebration of
reception?
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, by all means. I mean, this is like grace coming into the room. So she sang the words, and maybe many of you have heard this before. Um, all I ask of you is to remember me loving you. To hear that sung, I mean, to say it brings tears to our eyes is an understatement,
Yeah.
because that is it. That's their love coming through. Now, like when you talked about being at the funeral or at the wake, when people are coming up to you and you're thinking you've got to console them and vice versa, right? Well, that's your mom's spirit right there. It's center. It's present as much as it can be. And I think of an experience when I visited Sue's oncologist. His name is Keith Block here in Chicago, and his wife Penny Block, who are just incredible people in this very rough field of cancer. And I saw them about maybe 10 days afterwards, and I sat down with them, and they said, "How are you doing?" Your heart's on your sleeve. You're
Yeah.
like you're just ready to just like burst like a
Um,
flowing dam. Yeah. And I said, yeah, it's not easy. But I remember looking at them because they loved Sue too. We all knew each other really well. And so, I'm bursting out crying. And Penny, his wife, is looking at me and she's like, "Oh, Paul," because they were like sisters. Now, Keith Block says to me these words, "Paul, she never died. She just shifted dimensions."
mhm.
And I'm slowly looking at Keith's face and I'm like, "Dude, thank you. I needed that." Because, we think ourselves, we're pretty spiritually savvy. We're still human. And
Yeah.
you still go through these bumps and grinds, these ups and downs, and our humanness needs to understand, the soul's progression, its ups and downs. That yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for grounding me. Thanks for helping me remember. It's part of who I am. That
Yeah.
person who passed, that I'll never lose them. This goes back to what you were just saying. If
Yeah.
you can feel that love for your mom, or in this case for my wife, or whoever has passed away, they're not dead. I don't use the word dead or died. I say they passed away. So they just
Yeah.
passed into a different dimension. So, um, how does a person begin to accept life as it is now? And when we say now, that they could have died 5 years ago, they could have whatever, whenever their transition was. Do you, to what extent do you feel that acceptance is a major key in this series of steps?
I think it's huge, and I think this is one of the harder, I think, steps is to accept what is, because I think for a lot of people they do that. If I could just turn back time a day, I would do something different and it would have saved their life. I would have called them and told them to go to the doctor. I would have done that. We always go to that, like, what if I would have done this?
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of bargaining, that is a very big part of the process. I think once you finally get to the acceptance, honestly, it feels like a huge weight gets lifted
Yeah.
because it's like you can finally let go of it. Like you just let it go and just say, okay, I didn't want this to happen, but it did. And so now I have to figure out, what does my life look like now? Because mine, in my case, shifted dramatically. What my normal was no longer normal because the people that I used to go out with every weekend stopped getting together. And so I suddenly found myself alone a lot more. And my sister, luckily, she would call on me and say, "Are you okay?" Because also, I have to say, my children both moved out, went away to school after, they went to college after my mom died. And so I went from having four people living here in the home with me, because my brother also rented a room for me in my basement. And then he and I fought and didn't get along because of how he was treating people after the grief. And he moved out. So I suddenly went from having a full schedule, full of life, all of these things, to now, oh, it's just you're by yourself now. Like now you have to figure this out. Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
So for me, that was rough, and I did go through a little depression with that. But what I did to shift that was I started writing my book. I said, okay, well, I wrote my first book, and at first I just sat down and I was like, well, I just need to start writing and talk about what happened and get it out there. So I started doing that, and that's kind of what I did. But then I also started thinking about, well, what are some things that I've always wanted to do, and how can I start doing more of that? And I talk about this in my book, is that your new normal, and you have to figure out what that is. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can feel like that at first, right? Being alone, I was like, okay, this is kind of scary, and I don't like this. But it made me reach out to other people and connect with new people and make plans to go out with new people. I said for some people, maybe you decide, I've always wanted to learn French, so I'm just going to go take French lessons. Or I've always wanted to travel, so I'm going to go do this. It's an opportunity for you to really look at your life and say, okay, am I happy with where I am and what's going on? Or do I want to try new things? This is like the perfect time because you have to figure out what you're going to do now anyway.
Yeah.
So I did like a lot of like homework redecoration. I started gardening, which I never did before, and I always used to laugh because I actually pull oracle cards and tarot and all of that. I do that myself, and I started pulling all of these cards that are like, "You're going to work with Mother Nature," and I would laugh and be like, "What? How am I going to do that?" And then I realized I spent all this time like planting a garden. I even bought like a hydroponic garden and started doing all of these things that I never would have done before and didn't think that I would have liked or enjoyed, but I absolutely did. And I think that's one of the amazing things about loss, because it teaches you to really value life
Yeah.
and to not waste a minute of it. You know, that's one of the biggest lessons that my mom taught me was she always used to sing the song to me, I Hope You Dance. And I still can't listen to it really to this day yet. But the lyrics are, you know, if when you get a choice in life, I hope to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. And so her message was don't shy away from opportunities, don't just sit there and be a wallflower. Get out there and enjoy life and experience life. And I think that was one of the greatest lessons death taught me was to not take anything for granted and to really appreciate the life that we've been given. Because I think for most of us, we don't. We're like, most people are like, this sucks. I hate being here.
Yeah.
But it really it's a wake up call. We were given this life to come here and to learn and to experience, and why not do that?
Yes. Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm hearing a couple different side bands. This happens all the time when I interview people, and in normal life too. When I talk to people, it's like I can hear almost like another separate conversation into saying, "Okay, ask this or bring up, that." And one of them is, I forget who the author is. I will remember this in a moment because I'm pretty good at that. The ego cannot stand the end of anything. It could be the end of a relationship. It could be the end of a good movie. It could be the end of a good day where the sun is going down. You're like, no, that was the best summer day ever, right? Now, when it comes to death, that is the one that the ego just says, okay, I can't do a thing about this. When we say the ego, we mean, the mind, the standard mind that we use during the day to say, this is how life is. This is how life should go. I'm in charge of my destiny. It's going to go the way I want it to go, right? And you put your hands on your hips and you go, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
not just sometimes, quite often, life does not go that way. And the ego goes, what? But I'm self-determining. Something
yeah.
about death is, oh no, sorry, this is completely out of your control. So
Hmm.
then you're left by ourself in your situation. Can you think of a better way? In other words, a set of leverage that would have gotten you to pay attention to things that you might not otherwise had all those people not left your house. And then you're left with just yourself and your feelings. Wow.
Yeah. Well, before that, I used to wish time away because I would say, oh, I wish it were Friday. Oh, I wish I could skip ahead to, a month from now. And I realize now, like, that's really dumb. Like, don't do that. Don't wish away your life. Even though I know you have a doctor's appointment, you're like, I don't want to do this. Could I just skip ahead till after the doctor's appointment is over?
Yeah.
We can do that. Like, every second that we experience in life is important. It's teaching us something. We're learning, we're growing. And I truly do believe that life is a gift. And some days you're like, yeah, it's a gift I want to return. But it really is like we were chosen to be able to come here. And in my belief, and I say this in my book, and of course, if it doesn't align with yours, that's okay, is that we choose every situation before we even come to Earth. We kind of have a blueprint for our life, and you do have free will here and there, but you made soul agreements with your family and your friends and the people who are in your life to come here and experience certain things. Like my ex-husband and I came here to torture each other so that we would learn and grow, and I that's one of my greatest lessons was that relationship and that experience.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to understand because I've had people say, I would never choose that. Well, you did because you wanted to learn and grow quickly and elevate your soul. The only way to do that is to experience hard things because if you think about it, what do we really learn when life is easy and it's great and you're not really learning all that much? It's when we have to go through, you learn how strong you are when you're thrown into the fire
Yeah.
and you have to pick yourself back up again and rebuild everything. That's when you learn how strong you are, how valuable you are, how worthy you are. It's when you've been knocked down so low and you don't think you can get any lower. And that's when do we always look up to God? When we're at our lowest point, right? That's when we're like, oh, yeah, maybe I should start asking for help. Maybe I need to get a little help over here and do something. That's when a lot of people experience spiritual awakenings, honestly, is when something like that happens, when something I've heard of so many people who actually wake up to having spiritual gifts after they've lost someone major in their life. And that's kind of what happened to me. I went through a spiritual awakening after my divorce, after all of that happened. And then it's like my mom was like a second awakening. I was like, oh wow, this is really hard too. Okay. Well, this is why I think, and as you said before, when you go through it yourself, you're a really good teacher to help others because someone who just reads about it, like, oh, I read all about grief and all of this, they can't understand what you're going through and they can't really, even though they might be able to help you, there's nothing like getting help from someone who's been in the trenches and knows exactly. Is like you read the words and you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I went through. And I
Yeah.
think that it helps so much to know, like, oh, you're not alone.
Agreed. The quote by Khalil Gibran is really coming through right now. And that quote says, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. And when that shell breaks, it doesn't mean that you break. It means that the identity that you or I or us has formed up till that point, it no longer serves us. That identity was kind of like, here's what's hard to believe. It's been holding us back from
Hmm.
who we truly are. So when the shell breaks, the light comes in. That's, borrowing from another quote,
Yeah.
the crack is where the light comes in. That's where God comes in. That's when you can be informed. And deep down in the center is your true self, your character, your soul, right? And that doesn't, the mind is like, it's freaking out. It's like, I'm totally out of control because the heart now says, not because, in the background, the heart has our back. The heart
Hmm.
is the universe, you know, and the spiritual journey. And how many Groundhog Day experiences do we have to go through, right? I got you, babe. Get to do it over again. Get to do it
Yeah.
over again. And like you said, whether a person believes in past and future lives, let's put that off to the side. You still get to practice in this life, moment to
Hmm.
moment. That's hard for most of us.
Yeah.
So let's transition now into the kind of work you do. So you've written the book, right? So how do you help people? Like who comes to you and what kind of work do you do with them? Because I understand you do coaching and spiritual clearing work and energy work.
So I do coaching. I've had people come to me when they just feel stuck in life and they don't know, they're just not happy and they don't know where to go next. And a lot of times what we work on is our worth, our self-worth, because people have been conditioned so much by society, by their family, and they think they have to be a certain way. And so a lot of what we do is uncovering who they truly are at their core, like what truly makes you happy? Do you even know? And we have to uncover all of those layers where they've been told they're not good enough or they could never achieve their dreams. And we work on that self love and building their self confidence. And then from there, okay, now that you know you're worthy, you know that the universe is infinite and the universe can bring you anything you want. What do you want? And that's a scary thing. That's a scary question for a lot of people. Like, what do you want? Because a lot of people will say, I don't know. And like that's what we have to really tap into is like you're not stuck. You've just been stuck in patterns of behavior that aren't serving you
Good.
because a lot of times they are defense mechanisms. Our brain teaches us to be afraid all the time and to be on high alert all the time, especially if you've experienced trauma, which I believe everybody has. And so we get stuck in that fight or flight. And a lot of people, or freeze, a lot of people are in that freeze mode. They will not move. They won't do anything. They won't try anything because they're afraid of what could happen. So we kind of work on that. I've worked with people on many different things, but I do Reiki and I also do hypnotherapy with people. So we go to the subconscious and we try to uh, work on whatever it is they need. Because some people come to me like, I just can't lose weight. I just can't. I'm like, okay, well, so we're gonna tap into that and see what's going on there and try to reprogram you, try to tap into those subconscious limiting beliefs that we have. Because for a lot of people, that's what it is. I've never been good with money. I'm always broke. Well, it's probably some sort of programming you've got going on that you always, I know for me, my mom is a single mom, so we were always told like we can't afford that we have to watch our money. Though that was one of the things I always had to work on is that limiting belief of, got to break that money story that is roaming around there. So I have to work on that. I do readings too for people. So the way that I work, I don't see dead people, for those of you asking. I don't see dead people, but I do, I'm more all knowing. And so I will just get a thought pop into my head. So if people ask me, can you try to connect to loved ones? I can, and I will tell you what I get. I channel mostly spirit and guides, so I get messages to give to people, and it's things that I couldn't know about them. I don't go on anyone's Facebook page and look and tell you, like, I, first of all, don't have time to do that. Secondly, I tell you things like, well, I know that you're feeling frustrated with your job or this or that. And it's things I wouldn't know about that person.
Yeah.
And then I can pull tarot and oracle cards to give them messages and guidance to help them get on the right path.
Cool.
And well, a lot of people say when they work with me, it's like going to counseling and they feel so much better afterwards. And I felt the same way. I went to counseling and I think it's great. But one of the best sessions I ever had was with a tarot reader. She just sat there with me and she did the same thing. She just channeled what the universe was telling her and she absolutely nailed it, had everything I was going through, and then gave me practical advice and even a really good book to read, which started me on my self-love journey, which was the book You're a Badass, yeah, by Jen Sincero. I think it's, yeah, You're a Badass. And it was a fantastic book. And so she was kind of the inspiration when I wrote my first book. I kind of wrote it in that same similar style because I thought her book was funny, but it was very much to the point. And so I thought humor helps people look at things that are tough to look at.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the reason that I wrote my first book in that way. I tried to add humor in this book too. It's a little harder to add humor with grief, but I did still put that in there because I really do believe that it helps.
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah. So on the topic of self-love, this is something that it can be a trite-ism, practice self-love. You have to love yourself. That only gets so deep, for the person who, let's say, either isn't feeling it, wants to feel it, doesn't know how to feel it. I was with a partner who kind of had mastered that in previous lives, and I know why I met her because that's kind of some of the stuff that I needed, and I didn't know that. We seldom do we ever know that that's what we need to practice deeply on the inside.
Yeah.
How does one, first of all, get in touch with their own inner love. That would be like the first part of the question. And the second part is, how do you practice or nurture self-love? I mean, this is coming from a guy's perspective, so it's a kind of sound, most guys don't ask this question, right?
Right, right. Yeah, no, and honestly, a lot of women feel like a fake if they're trying to work on self-love too. It's like, oh, this isn't me. And that's a hard thing. But the very first thing that I always tell people is sit down and ask yourself, what am I good at? Or just ask your friends or your family members if you feel comfortable, what do you think is good about me? Like, what do you like about me? Because you'll be surprised at what people say. We did this exercise. I did this with my kids, and because I wrote a book on mindfulness for kids too, and we did this exercise, and I have it in the book where we all just sat around, and I said, "Okay, we're gonna pick a name, and I want you to write what you think about this person. It's positive things only, but like, what do you think about this person?" And when my son read what everybody wrote about him, he just had tears rolling down his face because he didn't feel that way about himself because his dad kept telling him, like, you're not. Or he just picked up that, like, he was lazy or he was this or he was that. And everyone said, you're so funny and you're so smart and you're creative and all the things they said about him. And we all need that. We all need somebody to be our inner cheerleader, right? Sitting there and telling us, you're so awesome.
Yeah.
And one of the, I think, best things, if there are parents out there listening, that I heard someone say that I love, and I actually ended up doing this with my own kids, is when they would come to me and say, Mom, I made the honor roll, or I did this, I would say, well, you should be so proud of yourself. I'm very proud of you, but you should be proud of, aren't you proud of yourself? Because then it's not, they're not pleasing someone else. They're not doing it to get your love or reaction,
Yeah.
but their own, you're telling them to be proud of themselves rather than saying, I'm proud. I mean, you should also tell them you're proud of them, but do that first because then you get away from people doing people pleasing behaviors just to, earn that respect from someone else. They earn it for themselves. And
Awesome.
that's where it starts. But I think if you ask people, what do you think about me? You would be surprised what people say because we're harder on ourselves than anybody else would ever be. So
Yes, true. So
it's a
true.
good place to start.
And that's a good, like an indirect definition of the ego. That's the part that's harsh on us, that
Yeah.
as Mary O'Malley, another lady I interviewed just a couple weeks ago, she calls it the storyteller. And the storyteller starts, it can tell stories that aren't true, oh yeah, I'm just the most loving person in the world. And inside it's like, I can't stand how I feel about X, right? The
Yeah.
storyteller jumps in and starts, pretending that it's in charge. When someone else, this is why I like your exercise, especially, I can imagine this is who was the young man? Was it your
With my
son?
son.
Your
Yeah.
son. What's his name?
Chris.
Chris. How old was he when he did this exercise?
Uh, he was actually, I think, like 15.
Oh
Yeah,
my
he
God,
was
because
sweet.
I can remember
Yeah.
being that age. If I had done that exercise, so I'm kind of vicariously doing it for my 15-year-old on the inside. Game changer, dude, right? Because
Yeah.
maybe we don't hear it. It's not that our friends don't think highly of us, although today's world is way different than when I was a kid. Geez, man. Social media thinks. Uh, if I would have heard things like that at that age, like Chris did, um, it resets how I feel and think about myself. So it's a perceptual shift, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so we could go on and on. I want to interview a second time. We're going to go through some different subjects. So let's figure out how to get some closure on this now. So if we were to do a quick review, we talked about loss and grief, a condition that nobody gets out of, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and then the kind of energy work you do, and now we're coming, into like this wonderful closure. How would you like to close? What sort of, if you want to call it an indirect benediction, you know, your prayer
Would
for
you
thing you
would
wish
you
most
let
for.
me like pull a few cards for people and maybe give them some sort of
Why
I
not?
could do that. Okay.
Yeah, why not?
Perfect. Yeah. They'll leave them with some I have some I have several card decks, but I have one that is talking to heaven that could give them maybe some closure if they wanted to do that one from like a loved one that they're missing.
Awesome.
I could I could pull one from there, and then I have my own card deck that I created called Divine Whispers. So I could pull a couple of cards from the Talking to Heaven deck and then a card from the Divine Whispers deck
Sure.
just to.
Yeah,
Okay.
cool way to do it, Melissa. Yeah.
All right. I have to turn on this light here because it's very dark. And my eyes are getting old and I cannot see. All right. So I will pull some cards from the Talking to Heaven deck. It is by James Van Praagh, and it has some beautiful messages. So if you've lost a loved one out there, anyone out there who's lost a loved one, and maybe you just need a little closure, I want you to just think about that person. Think about the person that you're missing and what maybe if you'd like to connect with that person, we're going to see what messages that they might have coming through for you. So I'm just going to pull a few and see what comes out. It's always kind of nice to hear from our loved ones. So the first card that came out is Now I Have No Pain. So your loved one wants you to know that even if their death was tragic and it seemed like it would be a very painful way to go, they don't have any pain. And they don't remember the pain of their passing. So if that's one of the things that is making you feel guilty, let that go. Or if it's upsetting you or bothering you, don't see them in that way because they do not have any pain anymore. Also, it says, my mind is free. So if they were someone who struggled, like my ex struggled with depression a lot, they're no longer afflicted with that. One thing I would like to say is, a lot of people think, oh, if you commit suicide, you're just going straight to hell. And this is my own belief. And if you don't believe the same, that's okay. You can just take what resonates and leave what doesn't. I don't believe there's a hell like we are taught with religion. And I believe that when people have depression and mental illness, it is the same as if they had cancer. Sometimes people are cured of cancer. Sometimes they get the right medicines, right? They meet the right doctors and they help them and they're able to walk free of cancer. And sometimes they die from cancer. In the same way, some people, they're able to get proper treatment for mental illness and they're able to live a full life, and some people don't. You have to let go of the guilt, and this is the amazing thing. The next card coming out is you have nothing to feel guilty about.
Wow.
So your loved one wants you to release that guilt because no matter what happened to them in this life, it's okay now. When we go to the other side, we see how everything really is. We go through healing. So if your loved one was sick, their soul begins to be healed. And if they had mental illness, they receive the proper healing that they never got while they were here. There is karma. Sometimes we have to go back and live another life. That's my belief, to resolve that karma. But it's not a bad thing. So don't have this fear that your loved one's just in hell, burning on fire, because I do not believe that at all. And the last card coming out there is I send you loving signs through nature, and there's a butterfly on this picture. So I believe that if you're seeing animals especially come to your nature, whether they're butterflies, dragonflies, cardinals, they tend to just come near you. That is your loved one trying to get your attention. I have hummingbirds sometimes that will just stop, flutter right in front of my face. And you don't even see them up close usually because they're so quick. And it would just stand there in front of my face, flying. And I knew that that was the message. So your loved ones are very much still with you, trying to tell you that they are here. And I thought I would pull a card from my deck, Divine Whispers, because I created this deck to give people guidance when they need it in their everyday life. And I love this one because the card that came out is Have a Little Faith. The universe is asking you to have faith, my loves. You may not be able to see anything happening in your situation right now. However, the universe is always working behind the scenes on your behalf to bring you what is for your highest good in divine timing. There are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that you don't even know about. There are many players involved in the situation. Therefore, it takes time for the universe to orchestrate everything. You don't have to have all of the answers right now, and you don't have to know when or how it's going to happen. Don't give up on your dreams. Your miracles are just around the corner. And there are mantras that go with this card. The first one that you can say to yourself every day when you're starting to doubt yourself and whether or not you can achieve your dreams is, I will walk by faith even when I cannot see. I trust that the universe has my back. I trust that the universe is working on my behalf to bring me what is for my highest good in divine timing.
Mm. Oh,
So that's the one thing about losing a loved one. If you can hold on to hope, if you have that hope, then anything is possible. You know that you're going to see your loved one again, and this separation is temporary, even though it might feel like a long time, because I could live to be 80s in my 80s, and it would be 40 years that I wouldn't see my mom. I know that eventually, we will be together again. And so you hold on to that hope that, the one day everything is going to make sense.
yes. Yeah. Beautiful way to close, Melissa.
Yeah. Thank you.
So your website is melissaoatman.com if people
Mm-hmm.
want to
Yes.
visit. And then below this video and or podcast, there'll be a link to your site and to your book and things like that. So much appreciated, my friend.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
yeah, in like vicariously, I was thinking like when my wife passed 7 years ago, I kind of wish you were around then because it's not that I needed I didn't need a lot of coaching. I needed to just to remember some stuff. And that's what's great about listening to a podcast or a video like this is because you know what? We know it on the inside. And it's educare, to educate is to help a person remember it within themselves. That's authentic teaching. You know, that
Yeah.
your teaching comes from your pain and suffering, but also your good stuff. Let's not forget all the good stuff that you've got or we've got, right?
Right.
So those two are the polar opposites. That's the dance of being a soul, a human-based soul, right? So
Yeah.
thank you, Melissa Oatman, for helping us remember how to dance in this human form.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.